This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
8:37 in the morning. You are listening to The Morning Run. I'm Shazana Mokhtar with Philip C. and Wong, Shou, Ning. We're turning our attention to the political dynamics in the country, looking specifically at the aftermath of the Sungai Bakap by-elections. Perikatan Nasional, or PN, secured the parliamentary seat, surpassing Pakatan Harapan by over 4,000 votes compared to last August's state election margin of around 1,500 votes.
In the aftermath of the result, UMNO Veterans Club Secretary Mustafa Yaakob expressed regret that DAP leaders had failed to engage the 22% of Chinese voters in the state constituency. During the poll last Saturday, only about 47% of Chinese voters turned up to cast their ballots.
Which then puts into question whether the Chinese support for DAP has truly dipped around the country, or is the low Chinese turnout for Sungai Bakap just really a one-off phenomenon?
Joining us to discuss the voter sentiment within DAP support groups is James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania. Good morning, James. Thanks very much for joining us. So, according to reports by the Merdeka Center and also the IC's Yusof Isha Institute, a good majority of votes for Pakatan Harapan in both GE15 and the state elections last year came from Malaysian Chinese. Do we know how much of this can be attributed to the DAP support base? Can we make the equivalence that Malaysian Chinese that support PH are also DAP supporters?
Good morning. So the short answer is yes. We know that a constituency with a very high percentage of Chinese voters are also the strongest seats for the Pakatan Harapan. So in some areas and some survey shows that 90% of the Chinese voters support the DAP. But I think on average across the board, you can make a persuasive argument that probably more than 80% of the current Chinese voters, especially in the last general election, voted for the DAP. The other time where a large number of Chinese voters voted overwhelmingly for DAP was, of course, 2018.
So the question is why? Why was there a low turnout of Chinese voters?
I think there are many reasons for that. I think if you want to sort of summarize it, a lot of it has got to do with national issues. I think a lot of Chinese people are unhappy. You have to understand that many people see a by-election completely different from a national election. They know that you're not going to change governments through by-election. So people are willing to use a by-election to send a signal. So the argument is that the majority of the Chinese voters, because national issues predominate in this by-election, they wanted to send a very strong signal, not to the Pakatan Harapan UMNO government, but to send a very strong signal to Anwar Ibrahim personally. I think for the non-Malays in general, there is quite a high level of disappointment in terms of the non-reform policy pursued by Anwar Ibrahim. But in recent times, a lot of the economic headwinds, I think, affected the Chinese community a lot. So things like the subsidy thing, I think it really affected the Chinese community. People don't realize that when the subsidy was removed, a lot of Chinese SME did not have access to the so-called targeted subsidies. So I think there was a lot of headwind. Then you've got the controversy over the matriculation issues, over the dual language. So all these things sort of hit the Chinese, and they wanted to send a very strong signal to Anwar Ibrahim. Because I think the general consensus is that he was voted in because they thought that he will bring in major reforms, but it looks like there's basically been no reforms, and the so-called reforms in the economy have actually hurt the so-called B40 and the ordinary non-Malays.
So James, if we assume that this sentiment is widespread in the country, how then do you think DAP might rebuild support within its voter base or even its grassroots?
It's not a question of DAP rebuilding the support. They have a support there, but this was a protest vote.
Okay.
So they're sending a signal to the DAP and Anwar in particular to buckle up, bring in real reforms, and to rejig the economy or revive the economy. So this is sort of a warning shot across the bow and said that, if you take us for granted, you're going to suffer in the next general election.
So you don't think that DAP support among the Chinese would also be affected as a result?
Like I said, in this case, this is a very specific by-election. So the Chinese are willing to do a protest vote in the sense that they don't want to come out. So it's a sort of a protest. So, but I suspect they will not do something similar in the general election when the stakes are higher. You have to remember, for the overwhelming Chinese voter, the number one issue is to keep PAS out of government. Because the worry is that although the minorities may be treated badly under PAS, they will be treated badly in a double way, not only because of the non-Bumiputera status, but the PAS Islamization policy, which scares a lot of non-Malays.
So you don't think MCA will be a beneficiary then?
MCA, of course, and all the other parties will benefit, but it won't be enough for them to win seats in the next general election. They may be able to build a little bit of support, but it's not enough for them to win any real seats in the next general election.
So on the other side, we do see PAS saying that they have made inroads in gaining non-Malay support. How would you interpret those kinds of statements that they say that they're winning over non-Malay support?
That is just kopitiam talk. Obviously, if you win by such a large majority, if unless you look at the figures carefully, you can play up the fact that you have increased support, and therefore some of the increased support will come from the non-Malay community. But that's actually not true. The reason why the majority was a lot bigger, like I said, it was due to the fact that the Chinese stay at home, they refused to vote, and also the fact that the turnout was a bit lower. So that's the reason why they had a larger majority. But I don't think people should get too excited. I mean, it was widely expected that PAS will win. It's just the majority sort of shocked a lot of people. People should not be shocked because that seat actually was won by PAS in the last general election, and everybody understands that the green wave has gotten slightly stronger since the general election. So the point I'm making is that the majority of Malay voters in this country has sort of hardened their stand towards the so-called unity government since the last general election. My own personal take is that the Malay population has actually hardened towards PN by about 10%.
So I guess the kopitiam talk is important, right? Because it's a gauge of sentiment. What's the sentiment of Anwar's performance then if you've already seen that there's a shift of the Malay voter to PN by about 10%?
This is where different people have different thoughts. So people like myself has argued that even though Anwar tried to turn to the right to capture the Islamic vote, he could not do it. We can see it very clearly, right? When he first got into government, for the first 6 months, basically, he turned the government very strongly towards the right because of the 6 state elections. It didn't work. My argument has always been that you cannot play this game because there's no way you can beat PAS in this game. And Anwar, of all people, should know, because in the 1980s, when he was in government, he and Mahathir were the one who tried to out-Islam PAS at that time. It didn't work then, and it's not going to work now. His best bet in order to make sure that Pakistan wins is actually to revive the economy. Because if everybody thinks that they have a good future, they have a bit of money in their pocket, economy is doing well, the jobs are secured, the children's future are secured, and revamp education, I think these are the 2 key areas where if he performs very well, I think he stands a very good chance of getting re-elected. If he plays the Islamic card, then he's going to lose in the next general election, or he'll be very, very badly done by at the next general election.
Okay, James, in the minute or so that we have left, the issue I have when it comes to the economy is that some of the measures that he's pushing forward, like the targeted diesel subsidy and the eventual petrol subsidy, they're good for us. They're good for fiscal reform, but they're painful. So how does he manage this? Is it now an issue of communication that this Madani government is having a problem with?
It is more than an issue of communication. Of course, communication has always been a very bad thing. I'm not sure why they're so poor in communication. But the bigger problem is the targeted subsidy. The people who are supposed to get the subsidies are apparently not getting it. You can hear the reaction from the ground. A lot of people are complaining they're actually not getting it. So the implementation part is really, really important. And that's where he's falling down. Now, some of my friends in Malaysia said that the reason why the implementation has not worked so well is because there are syndicates in the market trying to corner the subsidy thing. Secondly, people talk about sabotage by the civil service. But whatever it is, Rafizi really has to take control of the situation. And this is where the political parties can play a major role. Because the political party has a parallel structure to the community, so they can actually find out what's going on. The important thing is that if you get the implementation right and you get the messaging right, I think most people will go along with it, especially the B40. Like I said, economic times are hard, but if you make sure that if you bring in rationalization scheme, if you make sure that it impacts you at a very minimum, I think it will work. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is really you have to revive the economy and you got to move the economy to the next level. And the bottom line is that wages have to increase. There's no two ways around this. If wages doesn't increase, then we will be in big trouble.
James, thanks very much for speaking with us. That was Dr. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania, talking to us about what the Sungai Bakap by-election results indicate about support from Malaysian Chinese. Really, it's all the ball is in the Madani government's court, I think, to win voters over regardless of stripe. 8:48 in the morning. Stay tuned, BFM 89.9.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.
To 35